Picture this. You're sitting at a dinner party. The lights are soft, the laughter rehearsed, the conversation's predictable. Weather, vacation plans, the latest Netflix show. Everyone pretends to love. It all feels normal. But you hear something else, something beneath the surface. You notice the tremble in Michael's voice when he talks about his promotion. You catch the flicker in Jennifer's eyes when someone mentions her husband. You feel the silence swell around David the moment the topic shifts to ambition, while everyone else skips across the surface. You're already underwater listening, reading, absorbing, not because you want to, but because you can't help it. That's what it means to be a deep thinker. But this isn't some fairy tale about a misunderstood genius. This is a warning, because when you see what others ignore, when you speak what others bury, you don't become their savior. You become a threat. Your presence makes people uncomfortable, not because you're cruel, but because you make them feel seen. And nothing scares the average mind more than a mirror it didn't ask for. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote, "Whoever sees too clearly must learn not to speak too plainly." You live in a world designed to reward silence, to praise conformity, to protect illusion. So it teaches you to smile, to nod, to keep your depth quiet. Because if you dare to speak it, you might tear the veil they've spent their whole lives weaving. You start to notice it. The shift, the glances, the polite smiles that don't reach the eyes. You say something real, and suddenly the room stiffens. You speak the truth, and people laugh awkwardly. Change the subject. Avoid your gaze. Not because you're wrong, but because you're right. And they weren't ready. You see, when most people ask for honesty, what they really want is comfort in disguise. They want validation. They want predictability. They want you to play your role. Stay in your lane. Keep the illusion intact. But when you speak, you don't deliver comfort. You deliver clarity. And clarity cuts. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't soften itself. It doesn't fit neatly into pleasantries and small talk. So what do? They label you too intense, too cold, too sensitive, too serious. They don't say you see too much, you feel too deeply, you think too far. No, they turn your gifts into flaws because that's easier than facing their own fog. Carl Jung once said, "People would do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And you are that confrontation. You don't just speak words, you reveal contradictions. You don't just observe, you expose. And the moment you do, you cross a silent line from being liked to being feared. Not the fear of violence, not the fear of domination, but the fear of being seen too clearly by someone who can't be fooled. That kind of fear is subtle. It's passive. It shows up in small rejections and slow exclusions, in compliments that sting just a little. They start inviting you less. They stop texting back. They say you've changed, but you haven't changed. You've clarified. You stopped apologizing for your clarity, and that makes you dangerous, not in action, but in perception. Machiavelli wrote, "Men judge more by the eye than by the hand." In other words, it's not what you do, it's what you represent that triggers them. You represent freedom from illusion. You represent depth in a world obsessed with surface. You represent the mirror they've spent years avoiding. And mirrors break comfort. So they'd rather break you. But here's the twist. The deeper you go, the more alone you feel. The more honest you become. The more isolated you become. Not because you're unlovable, but because most people haven't even learned to love their own depth, let alone yours. That's the curse of clarity. You see the cracks. You see the patterns. You see the truth, and the price of seeing is being misunderstood by those who still need to lie. So ask yourself, are you willing to be disliked in order to stay awake? Because once you start seeing clearly, there's no going back, and no one is coming to save you for doing it. But you didn't come here to be saved. You came here to remember who you are when the world forgets itself. So what do you do when you've seen too much? When your clarity costs you company? When your silence is misread as distance and your depth mistaken for emotional danger? You stop playing their game. You start building your own. Because here's what they don't tell you. The world doesn't run on truth. It runs on comfort, on stories, on masks. And the moment you stop wearing one, you expose theirs. That makes you inconvenient, unpredictable, dangerous. So you adapt not by shrinking, but by becoming strategic. This is where Machiavelli comes in. He never told you to be kind. He told you to be effective. He never praised honesty. He praised leverage, because kindness without power is currency in a rig market. And the deeper you are, the more strategic you must become. So you learn to observe quietly. You learn to speak rarely. You learn to act only when it moves the needle. You master the art of the invisible strike. The moment when you say nothing, but everything shifts. The moment when you step back and suddenly they lose control of the room. That's not apathy. That's cold strategy. And it doesn't come from ego. It comes from knowing what your presence does when it's no longer begging to be accepted. Carl Jung warned, if you carry the unconscious of others, you will drown in it. So stop trying to carry their illusions, their discomfort, their unhealed wounds. That's not your purpose. You're not here to be their emotional sponge. You're not here to make others feel less intimidated by shrinking your mind. You're here to see clearly and move decisively. You're here to learn who to reveal your depth to and who to let drown in their own surface. That's not cruelty. That's selection. Because not everyone deserves access to the full dimension of who you are. Power is not in how much you show. It's in how much you withhold while still commanding the room. And no one understood that better than Machiavelli. He said, the wise man acts in such a way that his enemies cannot tell whether he is a friend or threat. Let that sink in. You don't need to be feared. You don't need to be liked. You need to be unreadable, because mystery is leverage. And clarity, when shown to the wrong audience, becomes a weapon used against you. So choose. Speak less but mean more. Show less but move sharper. Let the world underestimate you. Let them misread your silence. Let them label you cold. Because one day they'll realize you were never cold. You were calculating. Not because you didn't feel, but because you finally stopped bleeding in front of people who came to watch, not to help. To master the world, you must first master the patterns of people. Not their words, not their intentions, but their unconscious behavior. Because what people say and what they do are often opposites. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He didn't ask what someone believed. He asked, what do they repeat? Watch closely. You'll see the same story play out over and over again. They crave truth, but punish the one who speaks it. They say they want authenticity, but reward those who mimic the crowd. They praise intelligence until it questions their comfort. It's not because they're evil. It's because they're terrified. Terrified of being exposed. Terrified of being seen. Terrified of waking up from the dream they built their entire identity around. And the moment you walk into a room without needing validation, without apologizing for your presence, without playing the script they've memorized, you become the glitch. The one who breaks the pattern. The one who sees it, names it, and refuses to obey it. But understand this. Every system, every group, every social order has one rule. Don't wake the sleepers. Don't be too alive. Don't think too much. Don't disrupt the rhythm of comfort, because once you do, they'll turn on you. Not because you've harmed them, but because you've revealed they were already harming themselves. Machiavelli never underestimated this. He knew the masses do not want freedom. They want order, even if that order chains them. And when you offer freedom, true uncomfortable freedom, they'll reject you before they reject their chains. So what do? You stop trying to wake everyone. You stop trying to prove your heart. You stop trying to earn space in rooms built to dilute you. You observe. You study. You predict. Because human nature is not random. It's patterned. And once you see the pattern, you stop being surprised. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-feeling. You stop walking into traps disguised as conversations. And instead, you choose where to place your truth. You choose when to speak. You choose who deserves access to your mind. Nietzsche said, he who has a why can bear almost any how. But the world doesn't care about your why until it can no longer deny your presence. Until you move differently. Until your silence makes more noise than their performance. So pay attention. Who feels threatened by your clarity? Who punishes your honesty with distance? Who says you've changed only because you stopped playing small? These aren't enemies, they're patterns. Recognize them. Don't fight them. Just exit silently. Strategically, because you don't owe explanations to those committed to misunderstanding you. Let your presence study them. Let your absence confuse them. And let your strategy outpace your need to be understood. They insult you. You react. From that moment, you're under their control. You think you're defending yourself, but all they see is you choking on their opinion. That's the trap, because the world trains you to respond, to explain, to clarify. But deep thinkers, those who hold power quietly, don't play that game. They invert it. They master the one move that flips the dynamic without ever raising a voice. Silence, but not the silence of defeat, not the silence of fear, the silence of calculation. Tommy Shelby doesn't explain himself. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't need to defend his position. Because the moment you react, you signal that they control the frame. But when you say nothing, you shift the burden. Now they begin to wonder. Now they fill in the blanks. Now they feel unstable in the presence of someone they can't provoke. Carl Jung knew this. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And that's exactly why your silence is powerful, because it forces them to confront their own reflection. They thought they could define you, trap you in a label, trigger your need to explain, but you denied them the satisfaction. You held the line. You stayed still. Stillness is not absence. It's pressure, and pressure, when applied without emotion, becomes unbearable. That's why the strongest people often appear the coldest, not because they lack feeling, but because they've learned that expressing it isn't always strategic. So they can serve it, direct it, use it like a blade, not a badge. Machiavelli said, "A wise ruler must learn to be both lion and fox." The lion roars, the fox waits, and the deep thinker? They don't need either, because they walk into the room knowing the game is already rigged in favor of the loud. So they become the quiet one everyone watches, the one who doesn't respond, the one who doesn't explain, the one who simply observes. And eventually they realize you're not cold. You're composed. You're not distant. You're precise. You're not hiding. You're studying. You've mastered the inversion move. Don't prove your worth. Let their discomfort prove your power. You don't need to fight for the last word. You are the last word. And once you understand that, the game changes. You stop entering battles just because someone invited you. You stop defending every part of yourself to people who haven't earned access to your mind. You stop apologizing for choosing peace over performance. Let them misinterpret you. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Because while they're trying to figure you out, you're already 5 moves ahead, watching, thinking, waiting, and when you strike, you won't need to raise your voice. The silence you held was already loud enough to rearrange the room. There's something strange about a person who doesn't talk much. They enter a room, and without saying a word, they shift the temperature. People glance, they adjust, they become more careful. Why? Because silence is never neutral. It creates space. And in that space, others project their own fears. You didn't insult them, but they feel judged. You didn't assert dominance, but they feel small. You didn't question them, but they feel exposed. That's not because of what you said. It's because of what they fear you might be thinking. That's the aura of silence, a psychological effect that turns the absence of words into a mirror, one they can't escape. Carl Jung explored this phenomenon. He said, "Your perception of me is a reflection of you, and in your silence, people begin to reveal more about themselves than they ever intended. They start over-talking, over-explaining, overcompensating. Not because you asked, but because your stillness disrupts their mask. You are no longer part of the performance. You are the observer. And in a world full of actors, observers are dangerous." Machiavelli knew this too. He wrote, "Men are more afraid of silence than they are of violence, because silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates psychological pressure. The less you say, the more they imagine. The more they imagine, the more they fear. It's not about intimidation. It's about control. The loudest one in the room is rarely the most powerful. The one who says less but makes every word land. That is the one they can't stop watching. You don't need to dominate the conversation. You just need to stop reacting to noise. And when you do, when you sit back and listen, you'll notice something terrifying. Most people talk just to avoid their own thoughts. Their voice is a shield from their own mind, and your silence breaks through that shield. It confronts them with themselves. That's why silence isn't passive. It's tactical. It's not weakness. It's power distilled, focused, refined. Nietzsche said silence is worse. All truths that are kept silent become poisonous. But he also knew some truths must be kept silent until the moment they can cut the deepest. So you hold your truth like a blade. You don't wave it. You don't flaunt it. You sheath it until the time is right. And when the moment comes, you speak one sentence. Calm, clear, unshakable, and the entire room pivots because they realize the one who spoke the briefest least understood the most. And that understanding wasn't just intellectual, it was strategic. You've trained your silence to speak louder than their noise. And now they'll measure their words in the shadow of yours. There's a moment when it shifts. You stop chasing, you stop proving, you stop performing, and then they start watching. They don't understand why. They don't know what changed, but something about you feels different, heavier, quieter, more unshakable. That's the viral loop point. The tipping point where your silence becomes signal, where your distance becomes presence, where your stillness becomes gravity. Now they lean in. Now they replay your words. Now they ask, what does he see that we don't? Because deep down they feel it. You're not reacting like before. You're not explaining. You're not trying to be understood. You just observe. You move. You disappear. You reappear stronger. And that rhythm confuses them. They were taught to overshare. You master the art of leaving gaps. They fill space with noise. You create space with silence. They rely on attention. You rely on clarity. And clarity always wins long term. Machiavelli would call this the pivot. It's the shift from being perceived as unpredictable to being seen as untouchable. You become the person they ask for advice, but also fear disappointing. The one they gossip about when you're not in the room, but lower their voice when you enter. The one whose absence feels heavier than most people's presence. And here's the irony. You didn't chase this influence. You escaped from it. You let go. You walked away. You chose peace over power. And that's exactly why power found you. Nietzsche warned, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. But the one who survives that struggle, the one who thinks clearly in the storm becomes the anchor, the reference point, the eye of the chaos. They may not agree with you. They may not understand you. But when everything falls apart, they look to the one who never broke character. And that person is you, because you didn't chase status. You chased structure. You didn't imitate power. You became power, not through dominance, but through discipline, not through charm, but through restraint, not by speaking louder, but by listening deeper. And that creates a loop. People return to your words. Your silence lingers. Your presence echoes. They replay that conversation. They remember what you didn't say. They study your posture. They mimic your tone. Because influence isn't volume, it's resonance. And when your energy resonates, when your stillness carries weight, you stop being participant. You become the standard, the one they measure themselves against without even knowing it. That's when you've gone viral without ever trying. Not on screens, not in views, but in minds and the subconscious. And no algorithm can match the force of soul that refuses to sell itself. They told you feeling deeply was a gift, that empathy was power, that being in touch with your emotions made you more human. But no one warned you what happens when you feel too much, too deeply, for too long in a world that doesn't. You begin to drown not in tears, but in perception. You see every motive. You feel every shift in tone. You absorb every tension no one else even notices. And eventually your system collapses, not because you're weak, but because you've carried too much of what isn't yours. You were the one who could hold space, who listened, who translated the pain behind the smile. But while everyone was unloading, who was holding you? That's the silent collapse of the deep mind. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet erosion, a slow withdrawal from connection, from joy, from meaning. Because when you feel too much and no one meets you there, you begin to numb. Carl Jung said, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. But what he didn't say is that the pain of staying conscious is what breaks most people. So they check out, they perform, they blend in, they lure to smile on cue and cry in private. And you try to stay awake. You try to carry depth into a shallow world. But now your silence isn't strategy, it's fatigue. Now your distance isn't control, it's exhaustion. And that's where Machiavelli whispers, even the strongest minds must retreat to preserve their power. This is not weakness. This is recalibration. You're not collapsing. You're compressing, withdrawing your emotional investment from systems that only drain, reclaiming your energy from people who mistake access for entitlement. This is a purge where you stop explaining, stop overfunctioning, stop bleeding yourself out just to feel connected, because connection built on emotional sacrifice is just manipulation in a prettier costume. And here's the paradox. The more you withdraw, the more they come looking. The moment you stop reacting, they start reaching. But it's too late. You've seen the pattern. You've seen how emotions are used as currency in power games. They don't want your truth. They want your reaction. They don't want your depth. They want your availability. And once you stop giving, they call you distant. But distance is clarity. And clarity is liberation. Nietzsche wrote, in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epics, it is the rule. And when you feel too much for a system built on madness, you must go mad with it or detach. You chose detachment, not apathy, not coldness, but protection from a world that feeds off your sensitivity while mocking your solitude. So let it collapse. Let the performance fall. Let your silence become the wall between your peace and their chaos. This is an emotional death. It's emotional rebirth. You've felt it all. You've broken. You've bled. You've burned in silence. And now you're done feeling for the sake of others. Now you turn it into fuel, into strategy. Because here's the truth. Power doesn't belong to the one who feels the most. It belongs to the one who knows when to feel and when to withdraw. You don't kill your emotions. You weaponize them not to harm, but to control. Machiavelli said, whoever conquers himself is more powerful than he who conquers a city. And that's what you've done. You've conquered your inner chaos. You've mapped your mind. You've survived emotional warfare without ever raising your voice. That makes you untouchable. Because most people live at the mercy of their moods. They react. They erupt. They beg to be understood. But you don't need to be understood. You need to win. That's the law of power. Control emotion or be controlled by it. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But you've made it conscious. You've named your shadows. You've stood in the dark and refused to run. And now you control the temperature of every room you enter. Because you don't just read people, you predict them. You see their patterns, their triggers, their self-deception, and you don't react. You redirect with tone, with pause, with silence that slices. You say one sentence and shift the entire dynamic. You pause 1 second longer and they begin to unravel. You don't need to yell. You suggest. You don't need to fight. You frame. And that frame becomes a battlefield. Because power isn't loud. It's composed. It's measured. It's chosen. Most people act out of impulse. You act out of intention. That makes you lethal. Not in violence, but in precision. Machiavelli never worshipped strength. He worshipped leverage. And emotional leverage is the greatest weapon of all. When you can make people doubt themselves without raising a hand. When you can make them crave your approval just by withholding a glance. When you can destroy a manipulator with a single silence, you're no longer human to them. You're a structure, a force they feel but can't explain. That's why they fear you. Not because you threaten, but because you don't need to. You're not here to dominate. You're here to endure, to outlast, to outthink, to outmaneuver. And when the game collapses, as it always does, you'll be the one still standing because you followed no one. You watched them all. You felt what they ignored. You saw what they denied. You mastered what they feared. And now you don't chase power. You are power. One day you'll walk into a room, and no one will know what it took for you to get there. They won't see the versions of yourself you had to kill along the way. The softness you buried, the faith you burned, the nights you sat staring into nothing, wondering if it was worth it. They'll see the silence, but not the screams you swallowed. They'll see the clarity, but not the confusion you overcame. They'll feel the power, but never guess the pain that shaped it. And you won't explain because you've outgrown the need to be understood. You'll simply nod, observe, decide because your legacy is not in what they remember. It's in what they become after meeting you. You are the interruption, the anomaly, the cold mirror in a warm room. You don't leave behind applause. You leave behind awareness. The kind that lingers, the kind that disturbs, the kind that changes how they see themselves forever. Machiavelli said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." But perhaps the real power is to be neither. To be remembered not for how you made them feel, but for how you made them wake up. You don't need them to understand. You don't need them to agree. You don't even need them to like you. Because once you've seen the game, you stop asking for permission to play. You write your own rules. You move on your own time. You disappear right before they think they have you figured out. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them chase shadows. The truth? You were never part of their story. You were the consequence. The quiet storm that passed through their world and made everything uncomfortable. Not to destroy, but to reveal. The ones who hated you were threatened by your stillness. The ones who admired you saw their own future in your restraint. And the ones who forgot you were never awake to begin with. You don't need to make noise. You are the noise they'll never stop hearing once you've gone. So walk out. No goodbye. No explanation, just silence.